It's fair to say that fighting games took over the world in the early 90s. Games like Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat, and Killer Instinct were all over arcades. But the real money lay in the home. Consoles started receiving both ports of popular arcade titles, as well as games developed from the ground up. Unfortunately, fighting games generally required a 16-bit console or better. Those on older consoles or handhelds, at best, received severely compromised versions. Most of the time, though, they were simply left out in the cold. That's why Joy Mecha Fight's mere existence is so fascinating. A good 8-bit exclusive fighting game? Talk about a rare breed. Almost everything about Joy Mecha Fight goes against the grain. A fighting game, developed by Nintendo, for the NES, released in 1993? Weird, 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 and weird. As a Japan-only title, this was not a game that many people around the world ever had a chance to play. That's a shame, because this is actually an extremely well-made fighting game that takes advantage of the NES hardware in a way that few other games ever managed to do. Given its roots, the official version of Joy Mecha Fight is all in Japanese. This isn't a disaster, and you can still definitely play the game without too much difficulty. It is a fighting game, after all. However, there is a great English translation patch available that really helps to make the game even more fun to play if you don't speak Japanese. From the moment you see the game's incredibly endearing introduction sequence, there is a very Mega Man-esque flavour to the proceedings, both in terms of the visuals as well as the game progression. When you play the game's single-player mode, you begin with only one robot to play as, Sukapon, the character whose omission from the Smash Bros. Series as a properly playable character remains one of gaming's greatest crimes to this day. As you defeat the rival robots, however, they are reprogrammed and added to your stable. Built around a simple 2-button control scheme, Joy Mecha Fight feels familiar from the start, without being too unwieldy for the relatively restrictive control options of the NES. There are a variety of normal moves available via the 2 attack buttons, with most special moves being performed with relatively simple inputs. In fact, there is a great tutorial for each of the playable robots which shows you how to perform their moves. It's got a very SNK vibe to it, and is a great feature to take advantage of as you gain and test out new robot fighters. The robots themselves look great and animate shockingly well. This is due to a choice Nintendo made during development regarding the character sprites. In most games, including fighting games, sprites use different individual frames of animation to convey movement and actions. This means that the fluidity of the animation is tied to the total number of animation frames available, which was something that was often cut down for the less powerful home consoles. Instead of this, Joy Mecha Fight's robots are made up of several smaller sprites that themselves have little to no animation, but are positioned in such a way as to make up the larger character and convey their movements. It allows the limited NES hardware to still portray large characters and have them animate extremely smoothly. It's not unlike some of the sprite effects used in Treasure's 16-bit games to animate some of their larger bosses, but it's very unusual to see it, both in a fighting game and on the NES. It takes a little while to get used to it, particularly since the individual sprites leave space between them on the characters, and certain moves are a bit hard to track at first as a result. But once you've played a few rounds, you'll barely even notice it most of the time. The upshot is that the game is extremely smooth and responsive. It has the feel of the great fighting games on the 16-bit consoles, which is incredibly impressive given the hardware. Each robot has a lot of character to them, brought on by their stances and movesets. As a fan of grapplers in fighting games, one of my favourite robots is Giant, whose moves include powerbombs, headbutts, and a dashing punch reminiscent of Balrog's Gigaton Blow. Excellent stuff. It's quite impressive how much is packed into the game. Of particular note is the story mode, through which you unlock the different robots to play as. In an era where most fighting games had simple arcade ladders for single player, this was a big step ahead of most of the competition. There are lots of different robots to play as too, although unlocking them may have been a bit frustrating for players used to having a large choice of characters available from the start of the game. Overall, Joy Mecha Fight isn't just an interesting anomaly, it's a genuinely impressive game in its own right, making clever use of the outdated NES hardware to produce a fighting game that is tense, smooth, and exciting to play. Perhaps a revival could be on the cards. It certainly feels like ARMS on the Switch may have started out life as a follow-up to Joy Mecha Fight. This is a true showpiece for the NES, and a game that deserves far more recognition than it tends to receive.